Hey, and welcome to this sponsored talk. So I like the idea of taking a look at what the others were talking about already, and then taking it into like more of an Android app-based thing. But what does Deutsche Telekom do with APIs so far? We are testing our APIs in an early access program. So like 4 times a year, you can come to us, our offices at Deutsche Telekom in Berlin, and explore our 5G APIs. They only work in this network, and you will be the first ones to test them before the 5G SA becomes live. But since we are incorporating those APIs, right, we are working on them, we are actively developing them, sometimes we want to see those APIs changing, and we also want to see how those changes are affecting existing apps, right? So the use case is you are one of those 3 people coming to our offices. Development team just released a new version of the API, and you want to change the low latency or the high throughput through an app without changing the app necessarily itself. How this QoD API works in detail, how Camara plays a role into this specification of the APIs. I can only advertise the talk Noel has tomorrow at, what was it, 4:40, or come to our booth 1 level above. But let's go through opportunities, right? So if the APIs change, you could obviously start from scratch again, like depending on the changes, you take a look at the use cases and rebuild whatever needs to be changed in order to apply the new API. Or we could do no changes at all, right? We just stay where we are, there are no changes, which is obviously also not a good solution. So, as the developer evangelist at Deutsche Telekom, my background is actually Android development, right? So like I make sure that external developers have an easier time using the Deutsche Telekom APIs. So therefore I use my hammer, the hammer I know, which is spinning Androids, right? So I want to build an Android app that helps me make it easier to go with the changes from an API specification. And this is the app I built. Let's go quickly through the screencast here. So I open the beautiful T app, say I want to open, for instance, the cat API specification, and I see the beautiful text going through, which is rendered based on the specifications. I can only not only see the documentation, but I also can put parameters into the app. And if I now hit save on changing the parameter of the operation, we will see in a second that the app actually made the call based on the specification, based on the user input, live. And whenever I want to make changes, the changes are also there. So let's see what happens if the API changes, right? So with the next screencast, we will see what happens if the API changes completely, in this case, from the cat API to the quality on demand API. So we are at the cat API, I hit the plus button, and then select the QoD quality on demand APIs, and I see like, okay, it's immediately there. And if I see the documentation here again, I can also hit execute again, change values on it, or just hit OK. And in a second, I also see that this call gets this operation gets executed live, and I can see the error result in this case coming through immediately. So this is what I'm talking about, right? So like this is the focus, and now I want to talk a bit more technical. How did this happen? What is the magic going on behind? If you are familiar with Android development, this Android app uses Jetpack Compose, so that which is a reactive UI framework. It uses Kotlin serialization because this is the easiest way for me to integrate it inside. And except for the other standard libraries like Retrofit and OKHTTP, it also uses some called KML, CAML, because Kotlin, everything starts with a K, and it's a YAML parser, so that's why it's called CAML. Please feel free to give this person a like, because it's a really nice library. I don't want to go through the OpenAPI specifications because following the talks beforehand, I think they did a way better job in explaining them, going into the details of like, why is this here? For us, it's just important. This currently is the standard, right? If you want to specify an API, you use the OpenAPI specification. But inside this specification, there are also nitty-gritty details, which was for me also fascinating to just like not only use an SDK or a library that already exists and does the parsing, but understanding it deeply on what are the challenges involved in building an Android app like this. So, for instance, there is a feature called references, right? If you look at the top code snippet on my slides, this is a reference inside a content, right? So like this could be a body an operation requires. And in this case, we see that in the schema part, there is a $ref field, which is actually a reference to a part of the OpenAPI specification that is defined later on. And if you see the second screenshot I made there called create session, this is actually the definition later on. So what happens, or what should be happening, is that whenever somebody parses the reference link, the actual representation down there with create session gets replaced instead of the reference link. And this kind of reference scheming is going through all of the OpenAPI specifications. But it's also funny because this means I cannot just directly pass the YAML file and then have something I can use immediately. I have to do another resolve step, which means that I resolve the references before I can actually use them. And that's what I do. First, I define in CAML, or using the CAML library, a data object that represents, for instance, the request body here. So all of my requests body in this apps is assuming that there can be a reference. And this reference here is for naming details in Kotlin. I can't use ref and a dollar in front of it, so I have to specify the serial name. But all of the requests bodies have this thing, right? So which means whenever I'm parsing the YAML file, I need to check, is this request body an actual reference? Is this a reference, or is this the actual value? So I need to traverse all of the fields from all of the API specification to see if it has the reference field. And as soon as it has the reference field in this Kotlin code, I'll just say, let's resolve the reference. Which means in this case, I go to the part downstairs, which is inside the components part, look for the specific path referenced in the specification, and take everything under this path and create a new request body out of this one and put it where I was encountering the reference. And then this goes further, right? Because like also the reference I just recreated can also contain other references, right? Because it might be specifying other parameters who are, again, are referenced down in the components. And this needs to iterate through all of the pieces till I'm done finally. And now that when we are running through all of the references, this means we have finally an object that has all the reference cleared, right? So like we have now a specification that like probably duplicates, but still has all of the information available. What do we do with the information? If we are going back to the use cases we had, we want to have the Android app to be interactively using the user to understand what are the parameters I want to fill in. But therefore, I need to find out the variable parts, the parameters, and everything the specification specifies. So in this case, it's another traversal through the whole OpenAPI specification I just loaded. And in this case, whenever somebody clicks on the operation, I traverse the tree of the specification and look for parameters and variable fields and essentially like memorize them. So I put them in a map, right? I put them in a map, but the important thing is there that the key is the path of the parameter. So in order to find it back later on, I need to understand where this variable came. Is this part of the path? Is this part of a body? I need the path name here in there somewhere. And I need to remember it, right? And once I have remembered it, I can actually create the beautiful dialog we might have seen before. Because this is all I need from the user. I have found all of the parameters, all of the variables. So I loop through the map and then find for every key value pair, in this case, the key is again the path of the parameter I need to fill in, put it onto a description field and say like, hey, please give me for the base URL API route the parameter the user wants to put in there. Once the user put in the value there, I can again traverse the OpenAPI specification one more time, right? Because now I have filled all of the parameters with actual values, hopefully saved them to my shared preferences, and can then try to actually create the call, right? I can now go through all of the parameters, everything should be filled. I know the path, replaced all of the variable fields with something concrete, and create, using OKHTTP, the actual API call. And once I have created the API call, well, I can call the call and actually display the result in the field downstairs. And with all of this one, we have successfully created a thing that can dynamically call OpenAPI specifications based on user input without me needing to recompile it or use another generator for the new OpenAPI specifications. It's just directly in the app generated on the fly. And so far, so good. Obviously, it's not perfect. Nothing ever is perfect. I was thinking about what could be the next steps. So currently, it does not reflect the the authentication specifications, right? So right now, it just assumes that the authentication token will be part of the path or part of the body, but it doesn't use any header specifications. This could be another feature to be added soon. Or also thinking about the OAuth flow that you can specify. Maybe this should be or could be something nice to also add in here. You've seen it before, it doesn't support Markdown, which is actually great for me because like as a developer, I have the ability to read Markdown without parsing it into HTML. It's amazing. So this could be debatable and we can see later on if you want to add it. Also, if you are UX and UI minded, I am sorry. Because you know this is a developer app. It has Magenta, which is obviously awesome, right? But it might need some UI UX improvements on the long run. And with this one, I have to ask, so who wants me to publish this code? Oh, okay. I see one hand. Great, thank you. And there was another one over there. There were several hands, nice. But I'm also taking this one to plug my GitHub, our GitHub, which is github.com/dtdevelopers. We have some sample codes there, and if people ask me once more to publish it there, then also the code from this one will be ending up there. But I will also take this one for questions. This is the end. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. And if you are not sure about the questions to ask, again, there will be a workshop on Friday. There will be the booth upstairs. We will see each other again, and that's as well meant as I thought. Thank you so much. Enjoy the coffee break.